I'm in the middle of my favourite game that I loved to play as a child, hide and seek. You know, the thing I love about hide and seek is it's not really the hiding that counts, it's the thrill of being found. That's the fun of the game. It's the moment where you get to jump out from behind your hiding place and say, "Here I am, you can find me." Or the moment where someone spots your arm from behind a tree and says, "Aha, gotcha." You know, I guess as we grow older, we don't stop losing the urge to run and hide. But rather than hiding for the thrill of being found, we start hiding because of the fear of discovery. We start hiding because there's stuff about us, stuff about our lives that we don't want people to find out. I guess the Goo Goo Dolls probably said it best back in the late 90s with their single Iris.
And I don't want the world to see me, 'cause I don't think that they'd understand.
Aren't there moments for all of us where we don't want the world to see us because we don't think that they'd understand? But the song ends, "I just want you to know who I am." And isn't that true for all of us? We want people to know us, we want people to know who we are, but there's still stuff that we fear getting discovered. We're going to explore the story of a woman who had so much to hide, but who rediscovered the thrill of being found. And I think if we lean into this story, we can find something in it that will teach us how to rediscover the thrill of being found, so much so that we don't have to hide again. Children love to play games where they're hidden and then revealed, or something is lost and then it gets found. For them, there's a thrill of discovery, a thrill of something being found. But as we get older, we start to lose the thrill of it and we experience the fear of being discovered. I can remember really vividly 2 times when I was growing up where I so did not want to be found. The first was the very first time I wet myself at primary school. You may have a similar memory to this. I'd made it to the bathroom, I'd made it into the stall even, but hadn't quite made it to the seat. And I can remember even now standing in that cubicle, listening to other children coming in and out, but being too afraid to let anyone know what had happened. It just kept running through my mind. What will happen when people find me? Will they laugh at me? Will they judge me? The second time was when I was in my teenage years. I had just started dating my now husband, and I'd been given a curfew for when we went out. And on this one particular occasion, I had broken my curfew. I'd had one text from my mum saying, "Where are you?" about 10 minutes after my curfew, and another later, "Come home now." When I got home, the house was completely dark. I opened the front door as quietly as I could. I crept upstairs to my bedroom. I shut the door, I got under the covers, and I never wanted to come out. I remember waking up the next morning and really not wanting to go downstairs. In both instances, I realised that being found would come at a cost. Now, one wasn't my fault, but one definitely was. We're going to talk about this word, imperfection. It's imperfection that causes us to run and hide. It's imperfection that makes us fear discovery, because we see that discovery comes at cost. And we don't move past this in our adult years, whether it's our relationship status or our financial status or the true state of our marriage, the true states of our friendships, whether it's loneliness, illness. There's so many things that we know aren't right with us or in our lives, but we can't work out how to have it discovered without it coming at a cost. Imperfection is in all of us. We know it. We see it in the world around us. We see it in people all the time. We know nobody's perfect, but that's fine until the somebody who isn't perfect is me. Our culture is having a hard time dealing with imperfection, isn't it? Things are coming out all the time on social media. Leaders are being caught doing the wrong thing. Issues are being raised that have been in the dark for a long time, but we don't quite seem to have figured out how to deal with it. There's a lot of pointing fingers and they're the victim and they're the villain, and no one can quite agree on who is the victim and who's the villain. Depending on what your social media bubble is like, you'd have a different idea of what that is. And nothing quite seems to be solved by that. If anything, it seems like it's pushing imperfection more into darkness. It feels like the cost is now way too great of anything that's wrong in our lives being revealed, in case somebody suddenly labelled us as the victim or the villain. We have a hard time dealing with imperfection in our culture. We have a hard time dealing with imperfection even in our closest relationships. There are still taboo subjects, awkward conversations, things we gloss over by saying, oh, it's complicated, or I don't want to air my dirty laundry. We have a hard time dealing with imperfection. But the thing is, there's a cost to hiding it. When we try to push imperfection down, when I tried to push imperfection down in my own life to keep it hidden, I realized that there are two consequences to that. The first is shame. I push imperfection down, I keep it in darkness, and all that it does is make me believe I'm the only person with that imperfection, that it's my fault, that it will affect the way that people see me, and it will affect the way that God thinks about me. Or I push it down so far I can deny it altogether. There's no imperfection in me, it's only in other people. It leads to pride. It makes me say, well, it's their problem, not mine. It makes me distance myself relationally from others because I know deep down, that if they really discovered me, if they really got to know me, they would realize a bit of imperfection somewhere. And it puts me at a relational distance from God. Again, for fear of exposure. You see, darkness doesn't do away with imperfection. Actually, sometimes darkness even magnifies it. It makes it bigger, and sometimes it even pulls us into darkness with it. Pushing our imperfection into darkness can push our whole lives into darkness because we're so caught up in the pretense of perfection, in trying to convince everybody that all is okay with us and all is okay with our lives and our past and our story. There's a cost to being found, there's a cost to hiding as well. So what will we do with our imperfection? There's actually a story of a game of hide and seek in the earliest pages of the Bible. Whatever you think about this narrative, whether you see it as a historical account or a metaphor, it tells us about the way God and humanity's relationship started out and how they dealt with imperfection in the first instance. So Adam and Eve have been placed in this garden of perfection. They have a great relationship with God and with one another. And one day, through a various set of circumstances, they decide that they're going to eat fruit from a tree that God told them not to touch, which will give them an awareness of good and evil. They eat the fruit and they realize their imperfection. And just as they've done so, it says God came walking in the garden, looking to meet with them. And God calls out, "Where are you?" And Adam and Eve do what you and I do when we think we're going to be found out. They run and they hide. They hide because they're ashamed. They hide because they realize their imperfection and they don't want to be discovered. What will God do when he finds us? And it's a question that hangs over the whole of the Old Testament, really. A question that hangs over the Israelite people in their relationship with God throughout their entire history. They continue to rebel against God. Humanity continues to rebel against God and run and try and hide from him, basically. And God comes searching after them. And constantly, the question that hangs over the people of Israel is, what is God going to do when he finds us? When he realizes our imperfection? What cost will it come at? I said we would tell the story of this woman who rediscovered the thrill of being found, and the reason she rediscovered it is because she discovered the answer, the ultimate answer to that question. What will God do when he finds me? You can read about this woman's story in Mark's Gospel, which is one of the accounts of Jesus' life. The story of this woman starts 12 years before she enters the scene that we're going to look at in a moment. You see, she'd come to the time of the month where her monthly period should have finished, and she discovers that she's still bleeding. A couple of weeks go by and she continues to have the same problem. A month or so passes. She decides that she needs to seek medical help. So she goes to a doctor and explains her situation. She plucks up the courage to talk to somebody about her embarrassing and frankly taboo problem. Unfortunately, Mark tells us that what has happened to this woman is that the doctors have treated her but never healed her, never sorted the problem, and actually taken all of her money in the process of her medical treatment. And this woman's life is pushed into hiding. Her culture tells her that actually she can't participate in public or religious life because of her condition. She can't have children like other women can. She can't hold down a marriage like other women can because of this bleeding problem. And so her whole life is pushed into hiding until this moment that Mark records in his gospel. You see, she hears about Jesus, this guy who's been working miracles, healing people who seemed to be sick and would be sick for the rest of their lives. And she plucks up the courage to go out and risks even being discovered. You know, what a difficult condition to conceal, especially in the first century. So she plucks up the courage to leave her house and go out of her hiding place and go in search of Jesus. And when she finds him, he's surrounded by a crowd of people and they all seem to be hurrying off somewhere. She pushes her way all the way to the front of the crowd. She stretches out her hand and she just manages to brush the edge of Jesus's clothes. And suddenly she feels in her body that the bleeding has stopped. She's been healed. But that's not, I think, the best part of this story. You see, she turns to go away again, to celebrate her private hidden miracle in secret. And Jesus suddenly stops the whole crowd. Mark says he's felt power go out from him and he stops everything. And he turns around and he says to the crowd, "Who just touched me?" And I'm imagining this woman just is like paralyzed with fear. She's just come out of her hiding place. She's come and she's touched this highly religious man. And suddenly she's basically been found out. She's been caught in the act. She's frozen in fear. And I guess the question hangs over her the way it hung over Adam and Eve, the way it hangs over us. What will happen when I get found out? It says, trembling and frightened, she throws herself in front of Jesus. And I love the way that Mark says this. It says, she told the whole truth. Can you imagine what that would have been like? She's in this crowd of people and she tells this story about a bleeding problem that she's had. I mean, this is a hard story for women to tell now. Can you imagine what that would have looked like in the first century? But she somehow plucks up the courage to spill her whole story out in front of Jesus. And then she waits with bated breath. What is he going to say to me now? Is he going to run and turn away from me? Is he going to shun me, push me back into my hiding place? Am I now going to realize the cost of my imperfection being found out? But Jesus reaches down to her and he says, "Daughter, your faith." It's so beautiful. He reaches down to her and he says, "Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering." It is not the response she expected, let me tell you. And suddenly she discovers the thrill of being found. Now, what I absolutely love about Jesus in this story is that he is not remotely uncomfortable with this woman's imperfection. He stands and he listens to this tale of her suffering, of a story that no one would want to tell out loud, even today. He stands and he listens. He doesn't move away from her. He doesn't want to push it back into hiding. He doesn't want to ignore it or cover over it. He moves towards her in response and he says, "Daughter, I've found you." Now, this begs the question, why does Jesus respond this way? Why is Jesus so comfortable with her story of imperfection? In fact, all the way through Jesus' ministry, he seemed to be so comfortable drawing out people's really, really imperfect stories and their imperfect pasts. In fact, there's another instance where a guy called Zacchaeus, who's a tax collector, hears that Jesus is coming to town. And he knows he's got a past. He's been robbing people blind for years. And so he literally hides himself up a tree to make sure that Jesus doesn't see him, but so that he can see Jesus. And Jesus walks up to the foot of the tree, looks up and says, Zacchaeus, he calls him by name, come down out of that tree. He says, I'm going to have dinner with you tonight. Jesus didn't shy away from imperfect people at all. And then he said something that clarifies to us why Jesus knew how to deal with imperfection and why he was so much better at dealing with it than you and I are. He says, for the Son of Man, that's the name he gave for himself, the Son of Man came to seek and to what? To condemn? No, to seek and to save the lost. Jesus was headed towards his crucifixion. Within a year's time, he was going to lug a cross up a hill, be nailed to it, and with it take on all of our imperfection, the things that we've done wrong, the things that have been done wrong to us, the things that are wrong with us that we can't control. He was taking all of it. He knew where to put imperfection. He was going to put it all on himself, nail it to a cross with him, and leave it there, deal with it there. The ultimate consequences of all our imperfection, all the imperfection in the world even death itself, would be dealt with there. Jesus was not uncomfortable with imperfection because he knew exactly how to deal with it and where to put it, and he put it on himself. People who live with a pretense of perfection can't walk towards light because they'll be exposed by it. But this woman, she brings her whole messy, imperfect story out into the light in front of Jesus, and she gets found, and she learns to live in the light. And there's a pathway that she walks, not an easy one, in fact a really difficult one, but that one that if we can follow too, I think we'll slowly rediscover the thrill of being found and living in the light. The pathway she walks, first, she discloses her imperfection. She lays it all out there. She doesn't keep anything hidden. She tells the whole truth. Maybe you and I need to get down on our knees a little bit more often like this woman did and spill our guts, basically, to God. Tell him the whole truth, everything, all the imperfect stuff, the messy stuff. Now, the question you might ask when someone suggests that you do that is, well, how will God respond? How will God respond to me? And the amazing, beautiful answer to that question is, he's already responded to the imperfection. He's already responded to the mess. He responded to it all with the cross. I love how the writer of Hebrews puts it. Hebrews is a letter that's written about 30 or 40 years after Jesus' death and resurrection. And the writer of Hebrews says, or looking back at what Jesus has done on the cross, at the fact that he dealt with imperfection there, we can respond this way. It says, let us then confidently approach God's throne of grace. What is grace? Grace is the power and the ability to live not in light of our weaknesses and our failures, but in light of the strength and the perfection of God. Let us then confidently approach God's throne of grace. I love that picture. And receive mercy and find grace to help us when we need it. She discloses her imperfection. She pays attention to how Jesus responds. And we can do the same. And then she goes forward in the light. Jesus says to her, go in peace, which I think means go and don't hide anymore. Don't live in hiding anymore, live in the light. And you might say, well, how do we know this woman responds that way? Well, we know because her story makes it into Mark's gospel. She's told him. If you read Mark's account, he could only have the information he has about that story if he had heard it from her. We know that she must have gone forward and told that story thousands of times. She goes forward and she lives in the light. Now, for Zacchaeus, after his encounter with God, living in the light looked a bit different, because he had brought other people into darkness through his actions. So going forward in the light meant doing some reparation, doing some damage repair. But likewise, he discloses his imperfection. He realizes and pays attention to Jesus' response, and then he goes forward in the light. He brings other people into the light with him. Living in the light requires bringing other people into that life. Let me read to you what Richard Foster writes in his book, Celebration of Discipline. He talks about the discipline of confession. Now, confession is a really weird and religious and quite traditional word, but basically it just means bringing out things that are secret into the light, disclosing the secret stuff, getting the imperfection out there, talking about it. And he says this: in acts of mutual confession, we release the power that heals. Our humanity is no longer denied, but transformed. I don't know what it is for you that keeps you hiding. I don't know what it is for you that causes you to tell half-truths, or don't know what it is for you that makes you feel like you can't air your dirty laundry. But what if we went forward in the light together? What if we tried to move into light when everything else pushes us towards darkness? What if we followed the path that this woman took, disclosed our imperfection, got them out there, then remembered how God responds, reminded one another how God responds to that, not with condemnation, but with grace. And then we went forward in the light together, forgetting what's behind, bringing light into other people's lives by restoring what we have pushed into darkness, by continuing to live life out rather than living hidden and in the shadows.